Hello and welcome to Basics for Gamers presents the basics of Antimagic in Dungeons & Dragons. In this video we will explore exactly what is and is not affected by an anti-magic field, and this segment also builds upon some of the information that was delivered in our Basics of Dispel Magic video, so if you haven't already viewed that video, we encourage you to go check it out first. Anti-magic is an 8th level spell used to temporarily suppress the effects of magic in an area. It differs from Dispel Magic in that Dispel Magic permanently ends one specific type of magic, being spells and only spells, and Anti-magic is more like a pause button for all magical effects, and is not limited strictly to spell magic. Anti-magic fields have the following characteristics. Magical effects cannot be activated, and spells cannot be cast while inside an anti-magic field. If you are standing inside an anti-magic field, you can't cast a spell, regardless of if you are casting it yourself or using an item like a scroll or a wand. And magic items become mundane while inside an anti-magic field. A +2 magic longsword functions as if it was a normal longsword, including for the purposes of overcoming a monster's resistance versus non-magical weapons, and your boots of levitation can't help you dunk while you're inside an anti-magic field either. Magic effectively turns off when it enters an anti-magic field, but then turns back on when the magic effect leaves the field or the anti-magic field ends. Again, think of it as a magic pause button. Any magic that existed before entering the anti-magic field would still exist and manifest itself again as soon as it is no longer subject to the anti-magic field. So for example, a wizard carrying a staff of fire is standing outside an anti-magic field and casts invisibility on herself. She then steps into the anti-magic field, and the second her body crosses its threshold, she becomes completely visible and her invisibility spell can no longer function. Now, unlike if she had been the target of Dispel Magic, her invisibility spell was not cancelled or terminated by the anti-magic field. Instead, it was suppressed. The key difference here is if she turns around and steps back out of the anti-magic field, her invisibility spell will instantly manifest itself again. Likewise, her Staff of Fire would not work while inside the anti-magic field, but would function just fine once she steps back out of the field. The staff would not be destroyed or in any way damaged by entering the anti-magic field. It would just function as if it was a big fancy stick while inside the field. However, it's important to note that the time spent inside an anti-magic field does count against the duration of spells and other magical effects, even though they are not functioning. So in the case of our wizard's invisibility spell, it has a duration of 1 hour. If she casts it outside of the anti-magic field and then enters the field and stays there for more than an hour, and then steps back out of the field, her invisibility spell will not manifest itself again because the duration for that spell has already ended. The time spent inside the anti-magic field continues to count against the effect's duration, even though the wizard was receiving no benefits from the spell. Also, teleportation and other means of magical transport, such as Dimension Door or magic portals, will not function inside an anti-magic field. Neither the point of origin nor the point of destination can exist inside the field, so you can't use any of those means to enter or exit an anti-magic field. Likewise, any opening to a pocket dimension fails to open. Therefore, if you walk into an anti-magic field with a bag of holding full of stuff, it doesn't explode or dump its contents all over the ground. Instead, the portal that leads to the pocket dimension where all of the items are held can open, and the bag of holding functions as if it was a normal bag until it is no longer subject to the anti-magic field, at which time it returns to working as normal. Also, it's worth pointing out that anti-magic fields are immune to Dispel Magic and other anti-magic fields. So once an anti-magic field is in play, your best bet is to find the caster and break their concentration. However, it's also worth noting that anti-magic fields may be immune to dispel magic and other anti-magic fields, but they are completely vulnerable to counterspells. Those are the basic characteristics of anti-magic, but in order to determine if an effect or an item will be affected by anti-magic, you have to first determine if it is or is not magical. Fortunately, the Sage Advice Compendium has a very simple and clear test that can be applied whenever wondering what is or is not considered magic. If the answer to any of these questions is yes, then it is considered magic and will most likely be affected by an anti-magic field. The first question is it a magic item? And this includes all manner of magic items, magic weapons, armor, trinkets, and so forth. The second question is, does its description include either the word spell or the word cantrip? Spells, spell attacks, abilities that consume spell slots when they're used, and anytime you literally see the word spell or cantrip. This does not include effects that share the name of a spell, but does not specifically include the word spell or cantrip in its description. So for example, a Beholder's Sleep Ray. It has the same name as a spell, being sleep, and it creates the effects of a sleep spell, but since the Eye Ray's description for Sleep Ray does not specifically use the word spell in it, then is not considered a spell and does not meet the criteria of this second question. The third question is, do the words magic or magical appear in the description? This would include any special ability that is magical but is not defined as a spell. For example, if we go back to that Beholder's Sleep Ray, we know it's not a spell because of the second question, but Beholder Eye Rays are described as being magical, therefore they do meet the criteria for being magic here. If the answer to all of these questions is no, then is not magic and will not be affected by anti-magic. However, if the answer to at least one of these questions is yes, then it is magical and is most likely going to be affected by anti-magic. And I say most likely because there are a few exceptions. The first exception we need to discuss are spells with a duration of instantaneous that do not target a creature, object, or space inside the anti-magic field. Now, that's a bit of a mouthful, so let's tackle the first part of that sentence first. Spells with a duration of instantaneous. If an effect was created by casting a spell with a duration of instantaneous, then the magic portion of the effect has already passed and the effect persists. What this means is an effect created outside of an anti-magic field with an instantaneous spell will continue to persist even while inside an anti-magic field. For example, a cleric casts Create Food and Water and then enters an anti-magic field while munching on their conjured turkey leg. His turkey leg and all the other food and water produced by the spell will not just blink out of existence or interact with the anti-magic field in any way. Because Create Food and Water is a spell with a duration of instantaneous. Magic was used to create the food and water, but is not being used to sustain the food and water. Therefore, there is no magic remaining to be suppressed by an anti-magic field. Effects created by spells with a duration of instantaneous may enter an anti-magic field with no adverse effects, but these spells still could not be cast while inside an anti-magic field. Okay, so that's the first part of the exception. Now let's look at the second part. It says that do not target a creature, object, or space that is inside the anti-magic field. If you cast any spell including a spell with a duration of instantaneous, targeting something inside the anti-magic field, then the spell fails and fizzles out. For example, you're standing outside an anti-magic field and cast Magic Missile at an orc that is standing inside the field. Magic Missile has a duration of instantaneous, but since its target is inside the field, the spell fails and fizzles out as soon as those magic bolts interact with the edge of the field. We also should give some special attention to magical creatures. For example, dragons are described in the monster manual as being magical, which makes dragons magic per question number 3. But the only time magical creatures are affected by anti-magic fields is when there is magic being used to sustain their existence. Therefore, dragons, golems, elementals, and the like can freely enter and leave anti-magic fields. They're not instantly destroyed or blink out of existence when they enter the anti-magic area. However, they are subject to the same rules while inside an anti-magic field as any other creature, and they can't use magic or cast spells while in the field. However, if the creature is being sustained by magic, for example, an elemental has been summoned by casting the Conjure Elemental spell, that elemental would blink out of existence upon entering an anti-magic field. The elemental itself does not interact with anti-magic, but the Conjure Elemental spell would interact with anti-magic, causing the elemental to disappear until the anti-magic field ends. And if that happens after an hour, then the elemental would not reappear because the spell's 1 hour duration already passed while the elemental was being suppressed by the anti-magic field. The third exception to discuss is artifacts. Unlike other magic items, magical artifacts are forged from magics so powerful that they are immune to the effects of anti-magic fields and may operate as usual while within a field. And on a similar note, the magics of a deity are also too powerful to be suppressed by an anti-magic field. Okay, so we know what anti-magic does, what it affects, and what it doesn't affect, so let's bring it all together and look at some common examples. For each of these, we'll be asking, will anti-magic suppress this? First up, will anti-magic suppress adamantine or mithril armor? And the answer to that is yes. They are magic items and therefore will lose their special abilities while inside an anti-magic field. Will anti-magic suppress a magic arrow in flight? Well, if the magic arrow is targeting a creature inside the field, then yes, even if the person firing the arrow is standing outside of the field. Once that arrow enters the magic field, it becomes a normal arrow. But if the archer was standing inside the anti-magic field and fired a magic arrow at a target outside of the field, then the arrow would return to being magic as soon as it exits the anti-magic field and would have all magical benefits for attacking its target, again as long as that target is outside the anti-magic field. What about zombies that have been raised by the Animate Dead spell? Would they be affected by anti-magic? And the answer there is no. Animate Dead has a duration of instantaneous, therefore any creatures created with the spell are not affected by anti-magic, and therefore those zombies would be able to freely enter or leave an anti-magic field without consequence. How about Bardic Inspiration? No, it's not magical. What about a Paladin's Divine Smite? Can a Paladin use Divine Smite while inside an anti-magic field? Well, unfortunately, a Paladin's Divine Smite uses a spell slot on use. Therefore, anti-magic will suppress a Divine Smite and a Paladin cannot use that ability while inside an anti-magic field. Okay, so that's Divine Smite, but what about Improved Divine Smite? Well, oddly enough, a paladin's improved divine smite makes no mention of it being magic or using a spell slot, and therefore is not considered magic for the purposes of an anti-magic field, and a paladin can freely use improved divine smite while inside an anti-magic field. How about a dragon's breath weapon? No, it would not be affected by anti-magic. Although dragons are described as magical creatures, the descriptions for their breath weapons do not mention magic or spells, so anti-magic does not affect a dragon breath weapon. Let's say we have a druid who is using their wild shape ability and they turn into a bear and then walk into an anti-magic field. What happens? Well, the anti-magic field would suppress wild shape. The description for wild shape says that it is a magical effect, therefore anti-magic does work on it. The druid would simply revert back to their natural form as soon as they enter the field. Okay, so that is for a shape-changed druid, but what about for a shape-changed doppelganger? Well, anti-magic does not affect a doppelganger at all. Their shape-changing ability is not listed as being magical. Therefore, a shape-changed doppelganger would not be affected by anti-magic. Let's say a wizard casts Fireball targeting an area just outside of an anti-magic field. What happens in that case? Does the explosive blast of the Fireball extend into the anti-magic field and damage occupants and items inside the anti-magic field? And the answer to that is no. If a fireball spell detonates just outside of an anti-magic field, nothing inside the field is going to be affected at all. The anti-magic field will suppress the fireball's explosion, so any of the magical force from that fireball that is inside the explosive radius of the targeted space is just going to dissipate as soon as it hits the anti-magic field. Another commonly asked question is, what about monk ki powers? Does an anti-magic field prevent a monk from using their ki? Well, not all ki powers are considered magical, even though the general description for monks does refer to them as having magical abilities. If the specific power includes the words magic, magical, spell, or cantrip, then it is magical and would be suppressed by anti-magic. Otherwise, the monk can use the ability inside an anti-magic field. For example, ki-empowered strikes are magical and do not aid a monk while the monk is inside an anti-magic field. And Shadow Step doesn't work because it's a teleportation effect. But other abilities that are not labeled as being magic or a spell, like Stunning Strike, are not hindered by anti-magic. What about psionics? Well, yes, psionics are suppressed by an anti-magic field. Innate spellcasting is still spellcasting, so psionics will not function while inside an anti-magic field. How about a torch that was lit with prestidigitation? Would that torch go out as soon as its bearer walks into an anti-magic field? And the answer is no. The spell may have lit the torch, but the flame itself is not magical, therefore that person can use the cantrip to light the torch and then enter an anti-magic field without the torch going out. How about a ranger's companion bond? No, it would not be affected by anti-magic because a companion bond is not magical. What about draconic ancestry sorcerer dragon wings? No, these would not be affected by anti-magic either. Although sorcerers cast spells, the description for dragon wings does not mention magic or spells, therefore a draconic ancestry sorcerer can use dragon wings freely while inside an anti-magic area. What happens with magic walls? Say a magic wall is created that passes through an anti-magic field. Well, in that case, the portion of the wall, for example a wall of fire spell, that passes through the field will disappear, but the wall will continue on the other side. The anti-magic field is going to create a large hole in the wall, but once the field ends, the wall is going to manifest again as usual and fill back in those spaces. In this video, we discussed the effects of anti-magic. Anti-magic is an 8th level spell that suppresses magic within its area. Magic temporarily stops working, but resumes once the effect leaves the anti-magic field. This is in contrast to dispel magic, which completely ends the effects of spells. Magical effects cannot be activated and spells cannot be cast while inside an anti-magic field. Magic effects and spells activated outside an anti-magic field cease working once they enter an anti-magic field unless the spell has a duration of instantaneous and does not target something inside the anti-magic field. For example, a person with Blessed cast on them loses the benefits of Bless when they enter an anti-magic field, and casting Magic Missile at a target standing inside the field causes the spell to fizzle out once those bolts hit the field's edge. But an instantaneous duration spell cast outside the field and at a target that is outside the field is not hindered by anti-magic. For example, a necromancer casts Animate Dead to raise a few zombies, and then those zombies shamble into an anti-magic field. Those zombies will not be harmed by the anti-magic field because the spell that created them, Animate Dead, has a duration of instantaneous. But if the necromancer was outside the field and attempted to raise the dead inside the field, the spell would not function because, in that case, its target is inside the anti-magic field. The time spent inside an anti-magic field does count against a spell's duration even if the benefits of that spell are being suppressed. Magic items function like their non-magical counterparts while inside an anti-magic field unless the item is an artifact, in which case it is not affected at all. Teleportation and similar travel magics cannot manifest inside an anti-magic field. Neither the point of origin nor the point of destination can be within an anti-magic area. Anti-magic is immune to dispel magic and other anti-magic fields, but is vulnerable to counterspells. Inherently magical creatures like dragons are themselves not affected by anti-magic, but any magical powers and abilities that they possess would be suppressed as usual. For example, a dragon can freely enter and leave an anti-magic field, but they can't cast spells while they are inside the field, just like everybody else. Creatures that are the product of active summoning spells, like Conjure Elemental, are suppressed by anti-magic. The spell that sustains the summoned creature cannot function while inside an anti-magic area, and therefore those creatures blink out of existence once they enter one. But they would reappear once the field goes away, provided the duration of that spell has not passed. When questioning if an ability or effect would be suppressed by anti-magic, ask yourself, is this a magic item other than an artifact? Does its description include the words spell or cantrip? And does its description include the words magic or magical? If the answer to any of those is yes, then it's magical and would be suppressed, except in those special cases we've already mentioned, like spells with instantaneous durations and inherently magical creatures like dragons. With that, we'll bring this video to a close. If you found this video helpful, please give us a like, and don't forget to click that subscribe button and the bell so you never miss out on our future videos. Leave us a comment letting us know what topics you'd like to see covered in our future videos, and we can always be reached through our Twitter and Facebook pages too. If you'd like to use some of the maps that we feature in our videos in your own games, you can find them at Maps of Mastery. A link to that store can be found in the description. Thanks for watching, take care, and we'll see you soon with more basics for your favorite tabletop games.